I created the Power Rangers cinematic universe. Now, Power Rangers already has its own universe with the shows in every season, connecting with each other and happening one after the other. But I'm more or less referring to the Power Rangers cinematic universe from the Power Rangers movie that came out in 2017. And with me being hopeful that we get sequels from that movie about the other Power Rangers series, I wanted to make a timeline to, kind of give direction on how I would want them to go, because I feel like they're kind of just gonna go with the way that the shows went, but I would be hopeful that they would do it in a different way, and I kind of want to put my own spin on it. Because while doing my research for this video, I kind of found out that while yes, Power Rangers has its own timeline, some of the stuff doesn't really make too much sense as far as like a cinematic perspective. Like as far as if they're gonna make this, like some MCU level, franchise, I feel like the timeline needs to be a little more concise and, kind of put together a little better. And also just a disclaimer, I am not doing every single Power Ranger series. I'm only doing the ones that I've watched. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers up until Power Rangers Samurai. So I'm not doing Mega Force, Ninja Steel, or Dino Fury or things like that, or Super Mega Force and everything. I'm only doing the ones that I've watched and the ones that I have, knowledge of. Also doing research for this video, a couple of Power Ranger series didn't make the cut as far as being in the timeline because they just didn't really make sense. So Power Rangers Mystic Force got cut from the timeline because doing research, it didn't really seem like Power Rangers Mystic Force fit into the universes like at all, with the world that they built around it being about the wizards and the shadow and everything like that. It just didn't fit. And the same thing with Operation Overdrive, I just don't think that it fits anywhere based off the story of it and everything. Making the timeline, Power Rangers Operation Overdrive just doesn't fit in, doesn't make the timeline concise, and it doesn't really make too much sense. So those were the two ones that didn't really make the cut. So with all that being said, let's get into it. So since the first movie only really covered the very beginning of Mighty Morphin, we still have at least, I will say, about before we get out of the Mighty Morphin era, because at the very end of the movie they tease, Tommy Oliver being in the sequel and everything. So we still have a good ways to go before we get out of the Mighty Morphin era. So obviously we're still in the Mighty Morphin timeline with Tommy being introduced in the sequel, hopefully. Because the way that I will have the main timeline will go a little something like this. We will have the rest of the Mighty Morphin movies, Zeo, Turbo, In Space, Lost Galaxy, Lightspeed Rescue, Wild Force, Ninja Storm, Dino Thunder, Jungle Fury, Samurai, SPD, and Time Force. And I know you're looking at the screen asking me, well, Mickey, what about Power Rangers RPM? And I'm going to tell you about Power Rangers RPM. Power Rangers RPM is not in the main timeline, and it's not in the main timeline for a perfect reason. The plot of Power Rangers RPM is that a AI took over the world through like a government computer and everything, and basically the entire world was destroyed except for this one little like settlement dome that they had in some part of the world, right? So the way that I would go about the timeline would be this: everything up from Mighty Morphin up until Dino Thunder would have happened. Everything up until Dino Thunder would have happened the way that it did. Everything is fine. But shortly after Dino Thunder, Power Rangers have kind of become, more known in society, and they're kind of, more known by obviously the government, right? So with the government knowing more about Power Rangers, they want to experiment with some of the Power Ranger technology, with some of, the leftover morphers, or like with some of the leftover morphers and with some of the leftover like, Zord technology and everything like that. So with the government being nosy and experimenting with these, technologies and things like that, they make this AI to kind of speed things along. But then the AI goes rogue and takes over everything. And they were kind of, trying to make these droids to be like a Power Ranger police kind of. And then the AI ends up taking over these droids, taking over all the computers, and it ends up wiping out most of the world and the rest of the Power Rangers that were there. So now they have to hide in this dome, and they have to create a Power Ranger team to defeat the android and to defeat the AI. Now, Power Rangers RPM is not on the main timeline, because if that were the case and all that happened, that could be like a alternate. Power Rangers RPM is on an alternate timeline that I'm calling the RPM disaster. And the RPM disaster is basically when the AI and the androids took over most of the world. The Power Rangers that were there, that were able to, kind of fight back, it wasn't enough. And I know what you're thinking is like, well, with all the Power Rangers that were there, shouldn't they have been enough to stop the androids? No, because not all of the Power Rangers have their powers. The only Power Rangers that would have their powers during this RPM disaster would be Dino Thunder, In Space, Lost Galaxy, and technically you could say Wild Force. Because if you remember, basically all of the Ranger powers from the Mighty Morphin, Turbo, and Zeo days, those are all gone. Their Zords were destroyed, their headquarters was destroyed, everything that they had is gone. And the only Rangers at this time who still had their powers after their season was done is very few. At the end of Power Rangers Ninja Storm, they didn't have their powers, but they still had the powers of the elements that they controlled. Dino Thunder still had theirs. Power Rangers Wild Force, they didn't have their powers because after they defeated Master Ord, Animarium went back up in space. The Animarium wasn't there just, floating above the earth the whole time. So for them to get their powers back, the Animarium needs to be brought back down so that they can get their Morphers and their Zords. So who's to say that the Animarium would even get there in time for them to get their powers? So they wouldn't have their powers either. And the only other people who would have their powers on Earth would be Dino Thunder. In Space would need to fly back to Earth to try to fight. And who's to say that Lost Galaxy would even get like a communication of Earth being destroyed? They might not even know what's going on. So with very few Rangers and with very few Rangers having their powers, you can't really sit up here and tell me that a couple of Power Rangers are really defeating millions and millions of droids when it's only about, let's say, like maybe 12 of them with their powers left. They're not defeating millions and millions of androids, especially if their, Zords were being, used for testing or something like that. The AI could just, because I do have this one theory, and I know you're probably asking, well, what about Lightspeed Rescue? If an AI was to, hack into everything and take it over, Lightspeed Rescue's headquarters is underwater. That's right, if you remember well, Lightspeed Rescue's headquarters was under fucking water, and all of that was controlled by computers and machines. Who's to say that the AI wouldn't just hack into their mainframe and keep them down there, or just blow up their headquarters entirely? So they probably wouldn't even be able to get them, so they probably wouldn't even be able to help them anyways. So Lightspeed Rescue wouldn't be of no help anyways, because if they're already in their headquarters having a meeting or whatever, they can't get out because they're underwater. The AI hacks into their mainframe and keeps them down there or just blows it up. They're no help either. And yes, the Power Rangers are strong, but they have their limits. We've seen plenty of times when the Power Rangers have been overwhelmed by, a bunch of androids or, bigger threats, and they've lost. It's not a stretch to say that the RPM disaster couldn't wipe out the remaining Power Ranger teams that were on Earth trying to protect everybody. And that's how the plot of RPM starts. The plot of RPM starts with most of the world being taken over by the AI and by the androids. And they have this small little settlement that they have, and they needed to create a Power Ranger team. And with the RPM disaster happening, they found, they were able to, go through the scraps and everything that they had left to create the Morphers and create the Zords for the RPM Power Ranger team to defeat the AI and rebuild the world after that. And I felt that this would be a cool little twist to put on RPM, because it would be easier for me to just say, the androids took over the world and RPM was able to defeat the androids and the AI, and they were just able to, recover, the rest of the world by the time the next Power Rangers series happened. But I know that Power Rangers isn't realistic by any stretch of the meaning, but I feel like it would be just, a little bit more realistic for RPM to kind of, be the last Power Ranger series in the alternate timeline, and before they're able to slowly rebuild and everything. Because in that alternate version of the timeline, RPM would be the only one down there. It wouldn't be another Power Ranger series after that, because they have to build the rest of the world, not just, a city or a town or a stadium. They have to rebuild the rest of the world, because that's the plot of RPM, that the rest of the world got overrun by the AI and the androids, and they were the only ones left. So that's why, RPM is on the main timeline, because I feel like it would be a lot cooler to have them be like, the alternate timeline, kind of being like, the Rangers that went wrong and everything like that, and kind of them being more of a redemption story of the Power Rangers, because you could kind of play it out as, the Power Rangers that they had left, weren't good enough to defeat the androids, and people, lost faith in them, and the androids just, slowly but surely, overtook the Earth and things like that. But let's head back to the main timeline so that we can get the rest of the Power Rangers Cinematic Universe going.
Now a word from our sponsors.
Hi, before using Dubby, I was a father of 12. But now, after Dubby, I'm a deadbeat dad.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Let's see what we got in here for the Dubby. Big Dubby. We got the motherfucking. We got the motherfucking. We got the motherfucking. Oh shit. So the first flavor of Dubby we have peach and beet.
You what?
Second flavor of Dubby we got the dragon mayo. Next flavor we have laxative.
What?
Oh, Laxy grenade. Next flavor we have this is a zero sugar powder pack. And last but certainly not least, we have Heinz Berry Splash. I'm Wasabi, and this has been your Dubby advertisement.
So if you remember in the movie from 2017, they covered the very beginning of Mighty Morphin, which means that they didn't even cover any of the Green Ranger arc. They didn't cover Turbo. They didn't cover when they were ninja. They didn't cover any of that. So right now we just have the very beginning of Mighty Morphin. They haven't even introduced Lord Zed yet, which I would assume that they would introduce him in the sequel. And especially since these are movies, they're gonna have to do a lot of time skips with this, since they can't really show, every niche little interaction. I would assume that the second movie would be them fighting the Green Ranger and then having him turn to the good side by the end of the movie, just so they could, speed that process along, because that arc where the Green Ranger was the villain wasn't really long anyway. So I feel like the second movie about the Mighty Morphin era could just be them fighting the Green Ranger, and then towards the end he turns good. And then at the very end of that movie, then you can introduce Lord Zed. And then the third movie could be where Lord Zed destroys their headquarters and destroys the Megazords and everything like that. Some stuff I know would have to be changed, since it wouldn't be just a one for one, since it's not episodic, and they don't have 50 episodes to tell the entire complete story. But I feel like 3 movies for Mighty Morphin would be good. The first one they did was pretty decent. Second one, they could introduce the Green Ranger. He turns evil. They fight him. He turns good at the end. Then at the very end, you introduce Lord Zed. And then by the third movie, Rita and Lord Zed end up destroying the Zords, which ends up going into Power Rangers Turbo. And then in Power Rangers Turbo, you would introduce Divatox. And that could kind of be, the fourth movie to round out the Mighty Morphin era, because you obviously don't need too many movies just based off of one era, since you can't tell every single story bit like they do in the show. So I would say that Mighty Morphin would need about 4 movies, since it is. I would say that the first couple of seasons of Mighty Morphin would need about 4 movies. Because I feel like 5 would be a little bit too much, but I feel like 4 movies, you can tell a good bit of the story of the original Mighty Morphin before you end up going into, stuff like Turbo, and then, the original Rangers eventually get replaced and everything like that in Turbo. And then, Tommy comes back with the White Ranger and everything like that. It would kind of be, I feel like you probably wouldn't stretch it into 5 with Tommy being a White Ranger, and we have to introduce new Power Rangers in Mighty Morphin. So I'm gonna go ahead and say 5. 5 movies would be decent for the Mighty Morphin story to, tell its full entire story, but without telling every little, nook and cranny of the lore about it and everything like that. So the first movie they've already done with the origin story of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. The second movie, they obviously will introduce Tommy and Green Ranger. Third movie, Lord Zed and Rita would, destroy their Zords, and then you move on, going from the original Mighty Morphin into Turbo. Also after Tommy turns to the good side, you can have Rita and Lord Zed, take away his power coin, then introduce him in the White Power Ranger outfit, which will round off the end of Mighty Morphin. And then in the movie after that, that's when you can have Lord Zed and Rita destroy their Zords, and then they would end up having to go down the route of the Power Rangers Turbo. So the Mighty Morphin altogether would probably need the most movies out of any of the Power Rangers series, because they had the most consecutive seasons that were, back to back and being tied into each other. But after that, honestly, each Power Ranger series probably could do good with, 2 movies. Some of them maybe 3, depending on how long their finales were and how much stuff you need to introduce, because these movies would probably be about 2, maybe 2.5 hours long. So I would say they would all at least need maybe 2 to 3 movies at the bare minimum. Now obviously, timeline wise, Power Rangers SPD and Power Rangers Time Force, they both happen at the very end of the the Power Rangers timeline, right? One of the other big changes that I made to this, one of the other big changes that I made to the timeline and to this, whole cinematic universe was that SPD and Time Force happened at the exact same time. Power Rangers SPD is set to happen in 2025, and Power Rangers Time Force is set in 3001 and 2001. But hear me out. I feel like that would be a better plot if they both happened in the year 3001. Both Power Rangers SPD and Time Force both explore the whole narrative of humans living amongst aliens or mutants, and they both, kind of live together in harmony. But SPD happens first and Time Force happens after SPD all the way in the year 3001. But the way that I would want it to be, but the way I would want to go about it is that they both can happen at the same time, but at different times. In Power Rangers Time Force, we see that their city is ginormous, right? The city that the Time Force Rangers are in is ginormous. And we don't necessarily know how big the city is. So what I was thinking of is that, so when the Time Force Rangers go back in time to the year 2001 and they're fighting Ranstic and the other mutants, SPD could be protecting the city while Time Force is gone. Which is what I mean by them happening at the same time but different times. So Time Force could be fighting Ranstic and the other mutants in the year 2001. And SPD could be formed to further protect the city, because now that Ranstic has escaped, more mutants and aliens are causing, havoc amongst the city. Now they need an extra police force on top of the Time Force Rangers to help control the city and keep the city in check. So once the Time Force Rangers are gone to the year 2001 to try to bring Ranstic back to the future and prevent him from changing the past, the SPD division is formed to help protect the city as well. But if you remember in Power Rangers SPD, the Power Rangers SPD A team disappeared and were never seen from again. Which then you would bring in the B team, which we see in in the Power Rangers SPD show. So that way the B team of Power Rangers SPD is introduced and they're protecting the city while the Time Force Rangers try to bring back Ranstic and the other mutants that escaped back to the past. And I figured this would be a cool way to do it, since both of them explore, living amongst, aliens or mutants and things like that. And I feel like it would be a good twist to kind of, merge them together, kind of. Not them happening in the same movie, obviously, but after you introduce, the Time Force Rangers and they go back to the year 2001, then you introduce Power Rangers SPD, and so they're kind of happening, at the same time but different times. I feel like this will work good too, because Ranstic also gets rid of the first Time Force Red Ranger, and then they have to go find a new one essentially in the past. And if there is a world where they do the crossovers, Time Force and SPD could still do the crossovers, since technically they're one of the only ones who would have access to time travel outside of people like Lost Galaxy, or maybe in space. Maybe they built a ship that's capable of time travel and stuff like that. But Time Force and SPD could still do their crossovers because they will have access to technology. So we would still be able to get the Dino Thunder and SPD crossover that we got, and we will also still be able to get the Time Force and Wild Force crossover that we got in the shows. And one other quick thing that I have, kind of changed, and I probably mentioned earlier in the video when I was talking about RPM. Another change that I think would be good for the movie series or the movie universe. Early on in the Power Rangers, once we get to Power Rangers in space, I feel like that would be a good point in time to I feel like that would be a good time to do like an Avengers type thing where the government, kind of gets involved in the Power Rangers, because at that point they've been seeing, these people in these, Ranger suits and these big, giant robots fighting these aliens throughout the world and throughout the country, America, London or whatever. And of course, the government being the nosy motherfuckers that they are, they're gonna want to get involved, which is how I would feel like would be a good way to, introduce them in Lightspeed Rescue. Because in Lightspeed Rescue, the government basically just says, we invented these morphers, you're all brave people and you do good work or whatever, so now you're Power Rangers. So I feel like if they could kind of have like, sort of a presence, kind of like how they did in the Iron Man movie, where like maybe the Power Rangers go to trial because they destroyed too much of the city, or like they failed to defeat a bad guy, and now they have to go on trial with the government and say, oh, you have to work for us, or you can only do stuff if we authorize it and stuff like that. And it could create like a good source of tension and like a good back and forth between them. And I'm not saying, make Power Rangers like this super serious, like gritty, movie series or movie universe, but I feel like a good added enough, level of seriousness could do the movies better than the shows. because the shows can be tailored to be more goofy. But if we're gonna have, Power Ranger movies where, the CGI is a little bit better, where, it looks a little bit more gritty when they're fighting each other and shooting lasers at each other, I just feel like it would be a little bit better. I feel like it would be a lot better actually if we did add that, level of seriousness to where like it doesn't take itself super seriously, but it's serious enough to where the show feels like it has stakes to it and it feels like it has weight. It is not as goofy as the shows were, because sometimes the shows were just outright, too goofy at times. It was outright too goofy at times, in times where it didn't need to be goofy. And then plus also, I do feel like it can kind of be, a added layer of, because after I would say about Power Rangers, because after Power Rangers Dino Thunder in the main timeline, a lot of the morphers got more modernized. They're not necessarily, I guess you could say like, prehistoric relics that, they just, magically found. You could kind of put it into the way of like, because if you remember the morphers in Power Rangers Jungle Fury, they were glasses. And, these are supposed to be, some ancient relics that were from these prehistoric, animal spirits. I don't really think those would turn into, glasses to where you press a button, and then now all of a sudden you're in your Power Ranger armor. That could be sort of a thing where like the government got involved to where they're making these morphers and they're thinking and they're having these people think that they've been chosen by some ancient prophecy. But all along they're kind of being chosen by the government to help defend off against the aliens. The government is sending out these things and choosing specific people to really, be Power Rangers. And they're not thinking that, oh, we've been chosen by this, ancient power or this ancient relic of, morphers and everything like that. Because after Power Rangers Dino Thunder, that could kind of be a thing of where like they're no longer ancient relics. The government has been working on these morphers since Lightspeed Rescue, when the government, hired people to be Power Rangers. So they've technically hired people to be Power Rangers before, so why not do it again? And the same thing could be said with Samurai. They could kind of like have, like the ancient relic as kind of a ruse to be like, no, we're really just choosing you to be Power Rangers because you're the most fit people out of the ones that we scouted to be Power Rangers. Because they know that, somewhere these aliens from this, empire from space have been invading Earth over and over and over again, trying to get the morphers or trying to, take over the world and things like that. So I feel like that would kind of be like a neat twist to kind of put on the series instead of every movie just being, they find these ancient relics and now all of a sudden they're Power Rangers because they were, chosen or destined to. I feel like it could be like a good twist, and then maybe, the government could turn on them at some point in time. Because I'm not trying to change too much about the actual plot of the Power Ranger shows themselves, because I don't really have a problem with the plot of it themselves, because the villains are all fine to me. I don't really have a problem with most of the shows except for Samurai. Which, while I'm on the topic of Power Ranger Samurai, I guess I can go ahead and say why I stopped at Power Ranger Samurai. I stopped at Power Ranger Samurai because I feel like it was the last show that had, like a good quality about it. Not saying that the other Power Ranger shows that come out now are just bad. It's just Power Ranger Samurai was like, the Power Ranger Samurai was kind of like it just didn't really work well. Because if I was to change the plot of any actual Power Ranger shows to fit, the movie universe or anything like that, it would be Power Ranger Samurai. Because I feel like if your Red Ranger, like in Power Ranger Samurai, doesn't have any good character growth, then the show isn't good. Because he's the main person that's going to be on the screen. He's the main person that's going to have the most character growth. But your other Rangers also need to have character growth, and it didn't have that in Power Ranger Samurai. Because Jaden was a okay leader, but he never really learned anything. Because the main thing they would try to have him learn is to be a good leader and to work as a team. But every time you would think that he would, learn to work with them as a team, he would just do the same thing. So he never really learned how to be a good team member or how to be a good Red Ranger. He just kind of did stuff. Like he just kind of just, was just going out there on his own and soloing people. And also, one thing I will never forgive Power Ranger Samurai for is for fumbling the first female Red Ranger. I will never forgive them for fumbling that so much, because that actually could have been like a big thing for them. That could have been like a drawing thing for Power Ranger Samurai. But the way that they went about writing the first female Red Ranger just didn't work. It didn't even last that long. Like, she showed up and I think she was around for like 10 episodes before she gave the Red Ranger status back to Jaden. And they fumbled that so much that, like, I can't forgive them for that. But honestly, outside of Power Ranger Samurai, I wouldn't change too much about the shows and the plots and the villains themselves. especially the villains, because the villains as the shows go on get better and better in my opinion. Like Master Org is one of my favorites of the entire Power Rangers franchise, because not only was he a villain that you could take seriously, he was one of the villains outside of Ransik that I felt like could have actually won in the Power Rangers shows. Because Ransik is one of the main villains who actually won. It's just he had a change of heart when he ended up hurting his daughter. But villain wise, I don't really think you need to change too much. It's just they need that added layer of seriousness to where they won't be too goofy. You can't take them seriously. So all in all, not much really changed with the timeline that I came up for the Power Rangers universe. The only thing that I really switched out was, Mystic Force and Operation Overdrive not being there, because I just don't really feel like they really fit well, especially with the direction that it looks like they were going in with the 2017 Power Rangers movie. They just didn't really feel like they fit anywhere in the timeline. And when I was trying to make the timeline work, they just didn't really fit at all. But I do feel like SPD and Time Force happening at the same time would be way more convenient for the plot, since they basically, abide by the same rules of their world anyways. Like they both live with aliens, the Time Force Rangers live with mutants. It would work together well. And then you could also say that in the Time Force world, once Ransik goes to the year 2001, the other part of his gang tries to, take over the year 3001 and stuff like that. But all in all, I actually do hope we get movies for the rest of the Power Ranger shows, and I hope that they do the rest of the Mighty Morphin universe first before moving on like Zeo and Turbo and stuff like that. I hope all the villains get their proper shine, and I hope that they're actually as good as they were in the show. Do I actually think we'll get a sequel? I saw that they were I saw that one was in the works, but I don't know if we'll actually get one, because if I remember right, the one in 2017 wasn't really received that well. But I will hope that we get one, because the Power Rangers universe actually could make for good fucking movies. And especially the Forever Red special, which I forgot to mention in the video. That could also be like a dope side movie, maybe, if they do that once they get to Wild Force. That could also be like a dope side movie that they do to round off the Machine Empire storyline. That would be really fucking dope. But this was just, my take on if Power Rangers was given a cinematic universe and was given, an Avengers level budget to, make a movie out of the franchise of Power Rangers. I hope you liked it. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see y'all in my next video.